Welcome to the Entrepreneur Show. This is your host, Michael Mara. I'm the CEO and founder of Entre, a social network for entrepreneurs, investors, and freelancers. On this show, we interview the top CEOs, venture capitalists, angel investors, and founders. Connect with me and thousands of other like-minded people by signing up for free at joinentre.com or download our mobile app on iOS and Android. On this episode, I'm interviewing Yong Kim. He's currently the CEO and co-founder of Wonolo. He has an impressive background. He went to the University of Chicago. He went to Harvard Business School. He spent several years as an investment banker. He co-founded and ran the Coca-Cola accelerator. He's a scout for Sequoia. And then obviously his latest venture, Wonolo, has raised over $50 million. So we talked about a ton of different stuff, all relating to the future of work, staffing, flexible remote work, a bunch of interesting things. And this was actually recorded live on Clubhouse. So the quality might not be 100% great compared to some of the other episodes, but nonetheless, the content is incredible and the conversation is immaculate. So I hope you enjoy this episode. For people who are joining us, welcome. Thanks for tuning in. I have a very special guest with us today, Yong Kim, the co-founder and CEO of Wonolo, which is a very, very interesting company in the future of work. We're going to start with some introductions and then we're going to dive into some different topics and some questions. But I'm super interested in their story and how they got started. For people who are listening in, we will take a few questions from the audience at the end. So if you would like to ask a question throughout the interview, just feel free to raise your hand and then we'll bring a few people up towards the end. But we are also going to be recording this and it will be going out on our podcast. If you click on my profile and scroll to the bottom, or actually don't know if it's even on there anymore, but it's just entre.link/podcast. And we'll be putting it out on social and stuff. So if you guys just, follow up on Twitter or Instagram, we'll be pushing the recording out if you have to drop off early. But I'm very excited to have you here, Yong, and really, really thrilled to dive into this story. For people who are coming on for the first time, I'm Michael. I'm the founder and CEO of Entre and run the Future of Work Club here on Clubhouse. We do a ton of events and rooms with amazing founders like Yong and all around the future of work, tech, venture capital, entrepreneurship. And we bring on high-profile CEOs, investors, founders, and a bunch of very interesting people. So today, really thrilled to have Yong here. Yong, if you don't mind, I'd love to start things off with having you introduce yourself and giving people a little bit of a backstory into yourself and how you came to start what is a thriving and very fast-growing startup and tech company now.
Yes, thank you for having me, Michael. So, my story and, how we got to Wonolo, I was never, I never thought of myself as an entrepreneur growing up. And in fact, my dream when I was growing up was to be a teacher or a professor. So, very different from how everything worked out. But I'm an immigrant. I originally came from South Korea. I came here in the early 90s. I was 15 years old and I was alone. So I came here by myself and my entire family is still in South Korea and I'm still the only one in the US. And Michael, if you remember, early 90s, this was way before the days of Google and the internet and everything was manual. And I even had to go to a travel agency in South Korea to buy a plane ticket. And, you can imagine how difficult it must be for a teenager that didn't speak the language and didn't know anyone. And for whatever reason, I had this fascination about pursuing American dream. And I felt that, if I were to come to America, I would be able to somehow figure out how to pursue American dream. And that was basically it. So here I was in a small town called Wolfboro, New Hampshire, didn't speak the language. And on top of that, I had to find a job or part-time job to support myself, while I was pursuing my studies. And back then, the only way for someone like me to find a job was to, either pick up a newspaper and then go through the classified section, go to the phone booth and, insert a quarter and start cold calling, or you just go to different stores with help wanted or hiring signs and you just walk in cold and start pitching. And, my English was terrible and no one could understand what I was trying to say. So I had very, very difficult time finding a job. And, what came to my realization at the time was someone like me who was, relatively intelligent and, had a very strong work ethic, couldn't even get a job as a, general laborer. It's just got to be hard for, millions of other people who were looking for a job. So that experience really stayed with me throughout my career. And as many people's career, progresses, like very similar to how that goes. My career took in many different directions. I did pursue the professor, teacher track, went to graduate school for it. But while I was in graduate school, I realized that, what I had dreamed of to be a professor wasn't exactly, what I wanted anymore. So I dropped out and I became a management consultant, went back to business school. And when I was at business school, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my career and life. And back then, it was the heyday of leverage buyouts. This was like mid 2000. And, most of the top students at my business school were pursuing career in finance, investment banking, private equity, hedge fund. So I thought that that's what I had to do too. So I pursued career track in, Wall Street, and I spent almost 10 years, raising capital, doing mergers and acquisitions, various financing. And the life was good and, stable. I worked long hours, always traveling, barely spent the time with my family and my 3 daughters. But, in terms of financial stability and, in terms of the social status, it provided, what many people would kind of categorized as like American dream. But the important thing was that I was never happy. I never felt like I was fulfilled in what I was doing. And I wasn't sure where I was going, with my life. And I found myself constantly asking, is this the American dream that I had, imagined? And the answer wasn't clear. So one day, this was 2013, things were going well at work, but, I got up, I found myself having a real difficult time, even putting my clothes on to go to the office. So that day I walked into, my manager or, the head of the group's office and said, hey, I don't think this is the right career for me, even though things are going well. And, I want to pursue something completely different. And, my boss at the time asked me, like, what are you going to do, Yong? And I said, I don't know. I honestly haven't thought about what I wanted to do, but I know that this is not, what I want to do for the rest of my life. And, that was that. I came home, told my wife what I did, and I cried that night because I was very scared. And, I felt like I made a big mistake. And I thought about going back to the office the next day and, say, just kidding. I'm happy to have a job. But that opened up a lot of spaces for me to think about what I wanted to do with my life and, really like reflect on my career journey. And, I was probably in my mid 30s and, how I was going to build out my rest of a career. And while I was doing some soul searching, somehow I got together with a team at Coca-Cola. They wanted to run some experiments and they wanted to bring in a few people to observe their frontline work and, identify business problems and come up with solutions and just see what happened. So, my co-founder and I got together through this Coca-Cola initiative. We weren't sure what was going to come out of it, but we just thought that, we're in the process of doing soul searching and this could be an interesting way for us to really figure out what we wanted to do. And that's kind of how everything started, while spending some time with the team at Coca-Cola, doing a lot of different work in their front line, whether it's warehousing, merchandising, being a driver helper. These are all manual work, backbreaking work. We stood on our feet for 10 hours a day, but it was very, humbling and remarkable experience. And while we were doing the jobs ourselves in the front line, we saw one problem that was happening every single day, which was that the managers were struggling to find workers in a large volume, and the traditional staffing agencies were failing to deliver the solution to meet the needs. And I just couldn't believe that a company like Coca-Cola couldn't solve this problem, with billions of dollars in their, balance sheet. And they have all, connections to all the large staffing agencies, but somehow couldn't get the job done. And I couldn't believe that in the days like today where, everyone's using technology, everyone's using, automation, and, still the temporary staffing was still largely manual. So, it got me back to my early experience of how hard it was to find a job. And when I realized that there are still 70 million people in the US that are struggling to find jobs, and why is it that companies like Coca-Cola can find workers, and why is it that 70 million people cannot find jobs? And when I saw that disconnect, it really sparked a fire and passion. And that's when I realized that, wow, this is what I want to do, like solving this problem. And this could be my life's work. And I felt really, strongly about doing something about it. So it started as solving a problem. And I didn't think that this, solving a problem could turn into a startup and a company eventually. So it was, I became a founder by accident, and I call myself an accidental entrepreneur. That's my backstory. Sorry, it went a little bit longer than I anticipated.
No, it was incredible, and you're so humble with the backstory, because I know you didn't mention too many names, but I mean, you went to the University of Chicago for undergrad, you went to Harvard Business School, and you worked at Deutsche Bank. You were basically helped co-found the Coca-Cola accelerator. And and then it ultimately led you to starting, your company now, which is, it's just so fascinating. And I want to dial it back real quick to the moment when you left your job. It seemed like it was a very not necessarily impulse decision, but you kind of just hit you all of a sudden one day. Do you think that was something that accumulated over time, and you just kind of said enough was enough, and I need to make a decision soon, or I'm not going to at all? Because there's a lot of people that I know get caught up in kind of the, American dream, as you said, which kind of used to be this, very, great, stable corporate job, but now is becoming more entrepreneurial and more about, freedom and flexibility and being your own boss. So what was it that made you, I guess, want to make that decision that day? And if you can, maybe it might be helpful to share any self-talk or what you were thinking that led you to that, because I think a lot of people go through a similar thought process or similar situation and don't necessarily know how to deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great question. And, I have several people that, where I'm a mentor or I'm mentoring someone, and this question comes up quite often, and it never ends, right? Like, even for me, one of the questions that I ask myself honestly and objectively constantly is like, am I the right CEO for this company for this time or the next milestone? Like, it's a constant, recurring theme that anyone will find in their career. So in my case, specific to your question, it wasn't something that was just one day that happened. I got up and I told myself, oh, today's the day. It was something that I thought about from time to time, and it would come and go, right? Sometimes when things are hard at work or things are not as, satisfying, those thoughts would come pretty fast at me. And then when things are more controllable and I'm enjoying it, then those thoughts would kind of dissipate and I'm good. So it's constant on and off thing. But what was consistent was that, when I asked myself honestly, is this what I want to do for the rest of my life? Or is this what I want to, how I envision my life to be? The answer was no. So then what do I want to do about it? And And as you know, like it's harder to think about losing what you already have than thinking about what I could have by not having what I currently have. And it's people are more risk averse in like losing like something that you've been building towards, like sunk costs. Like that's a huge thing. So the question has always been around, well, I'm kind of scared, right? Like I know that the answer is no, this is not what I want to do for the rest of my life. But at the same time, I'm very, very scared of making that decision. And I'm scared of uncertain, things that are ahead of me by losing what I have built in the past, 15 years of my career. So that was always in my conflict. But one thing that I learned over the years, and including the decision that I made to leave, the comfortable life in South Korea under my parents' umbrella, and then to jump ship to coming to America. Like one thing that I learned over the years is that when I'm met with various options to choose, usually the right decision is choosing the path that is the most like uncertain and most scary, and also things that everyone will say don't do it, right? And usually that was always the right path for me. So choosing the most difficult one and highest risk. And for me, the option of leaving all the things that I had, crazy, lucrative job and huge mortgage to pay, $3 to support, like giving up all of that and starting from scratch was the hardest path. But I knew that because it was the hardest path, I knew that it was going to be the right path. So that's kind of how I came to that decision. And I think even now, like whenever I think about difficult decisions I have to make in the company or difficult life choices that I have, like I look at the options, and there are, from the level of difficulty, there are easier ones and there are very, very difficult ones. And usually when I make the very difficult ones that give me this like gut wrenching feeling, like that's usually the right one.
Wow. Yeah, that's a very good insight. And it's funny because it's something that you're definitely a lot further down the journey than I am, but it's something that I've been finding out as well. It's every day as entrepreneurs and founders and in startups and tech, you have to make these tough decisions, and a lot of times you want to go the easier route than take the hard route, but most of the time the harder path is the one least traveled, but that ultimately usually leads to where all the success is. So I hope everyone takes that little snippet away from today's conversation, if nothing else. But going forward now, and I'd love to hear more about how you really got the company going and on its feet. I mean, now you've raised over $50 million. You have, I'm sure, a lot of employees, and you've been, really doing this for the last several years now and becoming a leader in the future of work category and staffing industry. And how did you go from, you kind of, like you said, accidentally fell into entrepreneurship, you solved this problem and started doing it. How did you then go about really taking it to that next step, to whether it's raising money? Were there any key things that, looking back on now, were a huge reason that you were able to grow to what you became, whether it's hiring smartly, whether it's taking money and from the right investors? If you want to dive into any of those stories, or if you have any advice to share with maybe some entrepreneurs who are at the early stages where they might be able to take some of these lessons that you've learned and implement it into their businesses.
Yes, happy to. And I think there are so many different ways I can take it, but I'll share it from kind of the high level and then perhaps delve into any specific areas that, Michael, you want to take the conversation to. But, in just looking back at what the journey has been from starting as a, 2-person team to, now we have, little over 200 people. It it's surprisingly very similar to life journey. So building a company from nothing to something is like very analogous to how our own lives are built, and it's never a linear line, and it's like twisted, and sometimes you have to go back, and sometimes you have to retract, and sometimes growth comes at a step function, not a linear function. So there have been a lot of things that I had to learn by doing. But how we got started, at first it was just the two of us, and then both of us had more of a business background. Neither of us were programmers or had any engineering background, and we really struggled to kind of find a third, co-founder who really brought in the engineering and product background. And the two of us were just trying to do scrappy way, as much as possible. And, it's not like we had a lot of money that we could use. So everything was like very, very, we had to do a lot of, faking to make it. So like, for example, when we had this concept around, companies can push a button and workers would show up miraculously, and, everything that needs to happen from HR compliance and insurance and payroll, we would have to like make it so that they think that it's all done behind the scenes, like automatically. And we had to do that all manually. And along the way, we had to somehow make companies and workers believe that, what's enabling that experience is some amazing like technology that we developed. The matter of the fact, and even to date, like many of the things that we do, it's not quite like that. So the name of the game for us has always been, which of the problems that we are faced with, and these problems are either related to our customers or the workers or internal growth pains, and which of these problems do we want to solve first, because we cannot solve them all. We don't have the resources and budget. And even if we have $1 billion in the bank, we will still have to prioritize and sequence it in the right way. And making a decision around like which ones to solve first, how do we want to solve it, and then once we solve it, how are we going to scale it broadly, has always been kind of the central like name of the game in how we have been building and scaling the business. So the lessons that we have learned, or I personally learned, is number one, yes, like having an amazing team, and people always talk about it, but it is actually a very tangible thing. Like having an amazing team, a very strong focus on culture is like the most important thing, because once you get that right, then the rest of the things like product strategy, the roadmap, or financing, fundraising, that's more of the result of having a strong team that it makes everything else much easier. If you try to do it the other way and then try to get the people and culture side later, I think it's much harder to do. So sometimes I was, and still like, I get accused of, either hiring too slowly or firing too slowly. And, my investors would say, hey, Young, like, come on, like hire a little bit faster, or, let go certain people like, a little bit faster. But I think that there, as a business, and if I continue to make an analysis, analogous parallel to life, like if you try to brute force it, or if you try to like move too fast, that's out of like natural comfort zone or the way it should be, usually you have to do it again, and it actually prolongs the process at the end. So to me, like finding the right balance, like what is the current capacity of the company, what is the maximum like velocity the company can go, and then try to make sure that you have the right people within the team to deliver that execution and deliver the results. I think that has been probably the number one lesson. And the number two, you asked about like fundraising and financing. I personally, like, that's probably one of my least to-dos as a CEO, because I would rather spend my time working with a team and building business. But fundraising is one thing that only CEO can do. It's not something that you can ask your sales manager or product manager to do. Like it's one thing that only CEO can do. So it is something that you have to be thoughtful around. Have your own persona, your strategy, your style around it. And fundraising is never like you plan for like, I'm gonna do it once a year, but it's always like something that you have to do constantly. Like you always meet with investors because you just never know. So I take it as more of training. So like the more I do it, the more I talk to investors, the better I get, and the more different situations I'm in, more the more comfortable I become. So fundraising is something that you just have to do more to get better at it. And then the last lesson is that each juncture that you have, each milestone that you have, like you as a leader and you as a CEO have to level up faster than the company is growing. So like, for example, let's say you're going from 0 to $5 million and $5 million is your next milestone. You should be operating as if like you're already at $5 million, because otherwise the company is going to catch up faster than the way you grow. So the learning, like your capacity to accept feedback and constantly learn and velocity around it has to be very, very fast. Otherwise, you will quickly realize that, wow, like the company is actually like you're out of your comfort zone very quickly. So I think those are kind of the three things that I wanted to share at a high level. And Michael, like please feel free to delve into any areas that you want to get more details around.
Yeah, I think those are all very, very interesting, and we could probably dive into each of those individually for a long time. I'm curious, and it's funny that you bring up culture and hiring and all of this stuff, because you guys recently just got ranked a top 50 best places to work by Glassdoor, which is phenomenal. So congratulations for that.
Thank you.
And it just proves that what you're saying, you're backing up as well. And I'm curious. So you mentioned culture and hiring and really, not rushing that process. You mentioned about fundraising and, always, it's one of those things that's kind of an ongoing thing. And I'm curious that since you're also a scout for Sequoia, which is one of the most predominant venture capital firms out there, with that side of how you approach things, and I'm not sure how active you are as a Sequoia scout, but I'm curious how you approach that, and if there's any tips that you give to founders that you meet with, from, if you want to put your investing or scout hat on for a second, that you are looking for, or that would be helpful for people when they're approaching or talking to big VC firms like Sequoia. I think that could be helpful before we kind of move on.
Yes. So from the investor's perspective, and based on my interactions with other investors and feedback that I've gotten, over the years, and also in my prior job, working in Wall Street, I think that there's one consistent theme that always comes up, and that theme is that, at the end of the day, it's all about the people, right? So when you are trying to raise your very first VC institutional money, you probably don't have the product up and running. You probably don't have any customer or users. You probably don't have any revenue generated. What VCs are really looking for is like who you are, and what do you want to be, and I think that founders oftentimes miss that story, and VCs, they're also human beings too, right? They're people, and ultimately they can go out and they all have theses. They think that, gig economy is going to be something that's here to stay, and it's going to be $500 billion markets by 2020, 2030. So I need to find the winner, and they can invest in any companies out of 100 plus out there, but ultimately they have to make a decision on which company. But they can, when it's an early stage, when there aren't a lot to really evaluate, it really comes down to people. And I think some founders, and I've seen various different cases, some founders over-index on the product strategy, the early tractions. And I think those are important, but I do think that it's actually more important to tell your story about who you are, and what you're gonna do when things don't go as the way it planned, because it's gonna happen all the time. So how are you going to face those challenges? Or when you have 2 weeks of runway remaining, what are you gonna do? And And I think these situations are something that every startup will eventually face. And ultimately, what it comes down to is like the founders' grit and founders' like persistence and conviction and belief and ability to make hard decisions at the end of the day. And I think that's what investors are ultimately looking for. And as you scale and as you mature into more and gain more like metrics to show for, or various other things that you can share with investors, yes, like the focus areas would change. Like, so for example, once you start pitching to growth investors that behave more like private equities, yes, they will heavily dig into financials and your pathway to profitability or your strength in unit economics. And those are really important. But you, by then you will have the team, like the finance team or the ops team, that can provide you with data. But still, at the end of the day, you still have to sell to investors as like why you as the CEO are the right person to lead the company from where it is now to like the next milestone. And I think the storytelling and who you are, what you want to be, is still very critical. And that is one consistent theme that I've heard from just numerous investors, that ultimately what they're betting on and they're investing is the people.
Thanks for sharing that. I think that seems to be spot on with the other founders and investors that I've interviewed and talked with as well. And I think building relationships, and like you said, investors are people too. So building relationships and getting to know them and building that trust is huge. And before we start bringing people up for questions, if you have any questions and want to ask Yong a question, feel free to raise your hand. We'll be bringing people up here in probably like 5 minutes or so. I want to get into really, the theme of what your company and the club and everything is about, which is the future of work. And things are changing so much, but I feel like you are really at the forefront of this with your company and really solving kind of this flexible staffing industry and this problem that many people are having, because things are changing so much for the workforce with freelancing and on demand and gig workers. So I'd love if you want to share a deeper dive into your company and what you guys really do in the platform and whatnot, and share your thoughts on where you think the future of work is going and where kind of this whole next generation of workforce is going to be living and working and how they're going to be doing that.
Yes, absolutely. So we are focusing on a unique part of the market. So we focus exclusively on blue collar jobs. And it's an area that a lot of us in Silicon Valley don't quite understand well. So if you think about the overall, staffing or workforce market, it's huge. It's $500 billion plus just in the spend. And it splits kind of half, 50%, knowledge workforce, office workers. So what you may call white collar workforce. And then the other 50% is the blue collar, more the jobs that have to be done in person in the front line typically. And if you think about all the technologies that have been introduced in the last 20 years in HR or workforce related things, they have largely been around making the lives of the white collar knowledge workforce or office workforce much better, right? So like LinkedIn, great example. It just opened up, how we, the office workers, knowledge work workers, connect with each other, network with each other, and also showcase your credentials out in public. But the truth is that if you want to, if you're making $10 an hour working as a warehouse worker, you're probably not going to be on LinkedIn, and LinkedIn is not going to be very helpful for you. And you're still going to, face the challenge of like still having to, apply in person, wait in the line for onboarding session. Like the experience is still quite not there. And if you think about all the, billions of dollars of companies, whether publicly traded or privately traded in the HR or staffing space, they're still largely focusing on the white collar space. So Wonolo, our goal is to look at the space, so $250 billion of space. Just within the US, there are 70 million plus people that are working multiple different jobs. These are all hourly jobs to just make up for 40 hours a week. They make less than $50,000 a year. So the life is still very, very tough. And the mission that we have is like, how do we make their lives so much easier so that they feel like they have the dignity, they have the flexibility, they have the empowerment to work the way they want to work, kind of similar to all the things that knowledge workforce want, right? Like they want more empowerment, they want more flexibility, they want more voices. I want to do exactly that for blue collar workers, and that's kind of what we do. And how do we get there? Right now, is we are solving the problem of well, a lot of companies that need blue collar workers, for whatever reason, they cannot find blue collar workers, and there are about almost 50% of the blue collar jobs are going unfilled on a daily basis. But we have 70 million people that are always working for extra shift and jobs. And somehow they're just not finding these job opportunities, or when they try to find or apply for these jobs, there are just too many hurdles. And we want to make that connection between companies and workers much more seamless and make that experience just exceptional. So that's kind of what we are doing. And obviously, there are a lot of things that we have to think through, both from technology, operations, and legal. But we are very much focused on like solving that problem.
Yeah, and it's a big problem, like we were just talking about, right?
Yeah.
And it's something that I think. I mean, do you think COVID accelerated what was eventually going to happen, or how are you approaching, with things maybe going back slightly to normal over the next couple of years? How are you looking at how COVID has affected things and the work from home and all of this stuff? What's your thoughts on I guess how the pandemic has affected things, and then how are we going to be coming out of this as a workforce? Are things going to continue to stay flexible and remote, and are people going to be starting to get back more towards the office? Are you guys seeing any trends within your platform or with the businesses that you work with, and what they're looking for and what's in demand right now?
Yes, absolutely. And I think, Michael, you said it exactly. Like the notion of flexibility became so clear during the pandemic. So before COVID, the world was always structured as binary, right? It's one or the other. So you either work from the office or you work from home, or you're either full-time worker or you're a contractor. You have a job that you stick with for in your entire life, or you are a job hopper. Like it was always a binary view. And when things are binary, the innovation kind of suffers. I mean, at least in my view, what COVID forced was, whether you are on the knowledge workforce or the skills trade or non-skilled trade in blue collar, flexibility became the central theme. And everyone is thinking about, what does it mean to have a flexible career and work? And they're really, in the next, 10 years, we're going to think about what that really means and how it applies to the way we think about and approach and plan for work, not just from a corporate perspective, but policy making and legal and all these aspects, right? So, if we start from the flexible angle, what I envision in the next 2 years is that companies will think more seriously about the hybrid approach, because they will find some workers that are dying to come back to the office and have their own office space. But they will also face workers that want to continue staying and working from home because it's a lot more productive for them. And same thing, like, they will find that some workers may just want to work Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And other workers want to have, stability of having 5 days a week job. And how do we accommodate, different types of people and different types of needs? And I think that's a really, really interesting, like intellectually stimulating, like challenge that we all have to solve. And I think the world will no longer become, black and white or binary picture. There's going to be a lot of different colors and a lot of different ways that we approach things. And I think that part is really exciting.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree. And it's going to be interesting. We should definitely would love to have you involved in some of these future conversations that we'll probably be having here on Clubhouse and on Entre as well. Young, there was something else that I wanted to bring up around the living wage, and a lot of people have been talking about the minimum wage increasing. Obviously, you have the conversations with Amazon workers wanting to unionize. There's a lot of conversations around Uber and Lyft drivers being employees, and all of these different conversations. I'm curious how you and your company are thinking about the living wage and how this is going to be changing here in the future as well.
Yes. So living wage, I mean, specifically living wage pledge is something that we as a company launched very recently. And the idea evolves around the notion of, something that goes against the rigid structure, right? So if you think about minimum wage, it's also stemming from kind of the binary, way of thinking and applying minimum wage like certain one set of number to everywhere or every situation defeats the purpose on many fronts for both workers and companies. So how do you get out of that binary mindset and add more flexibility into thinking about the wage and how do we account for the local housing prices or living cost and things like that into the wage, and that's kind of the core thesis of living wage. So it is something that we have been talking to many large corporations over the years. They all agree that that's a solution that should be adopted, and it's something that they should be fully behind. But I personally never saw anything coming out of those discussions with these large companies, and they would always be stuck. It's always like a nice conversation to have, and they would say yes, like I'm so fired up, I want to do something about it, but nothing would come out. So we as a smaller company, I mean, still a startup, said, well, if large corporations are not going to do anything about it, we're going to do something. So especially in the last 2 years, we have been convincing customers that we work with to pay the living wage for workers, and even those ones that are paying above minimum wage, we would encourage them to pay the living wage because there are a lot of benefits for both sides. And when we got to about 75% of our customers paying the living wage, we were so encouraged by the trends and the support from our customer that we had to believe that there are so many other companies that would believe in this vision and believe in this pledge. So we took the first act and we really want to get to 100% by the end of the year. And it is something that we feel really proud of and excited about.
Yeah, I commend you for that. I think it's something that is extremely important. Is there a way that you, I guess, classify or calculate the living wage compared to obviously a minimum wage is kind of a fixed thing, but I would assume kind of the living wage would maybe depend on where they're living, and I'm not sure if there's a way to actually calculate that
Yes,
based
absolutely.
on average cost of living per in that county, or if you want to dive into that, I think it'd be helpful for people to understand what you mean and how you go about calculating the living wage.
Yes, and I can make it super easy for you and the audience. So the very smart researchers at MIT have already done the hard work, and then they have a website, and you can look it up, MIT Living Wage Calculator. And if you can go in there, you can look up what the living wage should be at the place that wherever you are. It will give you the answer. So it's that simple.
Got it. Yeah, I was just typing that into my bio for everyone. It's just livingwage.mit.edu.
Yes.
And yeah, it's really interesting. I did not know this was a thing. So appreciate you sharing this. And Young, as we wrap things up here, where's the best place for people to follow up with you, learn more about Wonolo, and what types of businesses or what types of workers should sign up and maybe become part of the platform so that they can benefit from what you've built.
Yes, thank you. So we are active in all the usual, social media channels. But the best way to connect with me is through LinkedIn. And also you can just, send me an email at, young@wonolo.com. And, anyone can download the app, Wonolo app, and you can sign up. And, if you want to pick up a job, even tomorrow morning, you can do so. So it's super easy. But once again, as I mentioned, I don't know what the composition of the audience is here, but we focus, 100% on the blue collar frontline jobs. And, a lot of these jobs, are stepping stone for kind of moving up the ladder in their career. So if you're looking for flexible work, looking for additional, extra income, definitely, check it out.
Fantastic. And I just put, for people who are going to check it out, I just put the link there to livingwage.mit.edu if people want to check that out. And then I also put the link to Young's company, the website. It's just wonolo.com. So really, really appreciate you coming on, Young. Very fascinating story. Love what you're doing. And if you have any final words that you'd like to share with anyone. Most of the people here listening in our audience on the podcast and everything are mostly entrepreneurs, ranging from freelancers to startup and tech founders. So if you have any final piece of advice or words of encouragement, that would be amazing as we wrap things up here.
Yes, thank you, Michael. I mean, the last thing that I would say is that the entrepreneur's journey is like very, very hard, and it's going to be harder than you would imagine, but it is so rewarding, and there's nothing like it. And there will be a lot of challenges, but one thing that you want to remember is that whenever you are surrounded by naysayers or people with a lot of opinions, and they say you should do this or do that, or don't do this, don't do that, always have a conviction, because they haven't done it. They don't know what you're going through. And, if they are so, sure about their opinions, like, why don't they do it? So none of them will understand what you're going through, but please, don't listen to naysayers, and just keep going. And I think when you keep going, a lot more opportunities will come, and you'll be surprised just like how, some of the impossible things that may seem are actually very possible. So just keep going, prove naysayers wrong. And whoever is embarking on this journey, I'm super proud of you. I'm excited for you, and I'll be cheering for you. So that'll be my final additional, thing to say.
Well, I love that final piece there. And yeah, I can't share enough how much, persistence and consistency and patience have played in my life. And I totally agree with all of that. So, Young, thank you so much for being on. Really, really enjoyed this. For those of you who maybe came in late, we have recorded this. This will go out on our podcast as well, and you can just check that out on entre.link/podcast. I'll drop the link to all of this on my Twitter when it's live as well. If people just want to follow me there on Instagram, I'll be sharing it. And definitely, follow Young and connect with him. I think he said on LinkedIn would be the best place. And if you're interested in what they're doing, check it out. They have a fantastic platform. And, I really enjoyed this, and thanks so much for coming on. For those of you who haven't been to one of our clubs in one of our rooms here under Future of Work, you can just tap the little greenhouse at the top and follow the club. We have a bunch of exciting interviews and rooms coming up, with the one being with the CEO of Zapier. We're doing one next week on psychedelics and how that's going to play into the workforce and entrepreneurs as well. And a lot of other things on AR and VR coming up as well. But really appreciate everyone who stuck this out and who listened in throughout the interview. And if anyone wants to collaborate with us here on Clubhouse or on Entre, feel free to reach out and let me know. But Young, really appreciate it. Thanks so much for coming on and sharing your amazing story.
Well, thank you, Michael, for your time as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone. Have a great rest of your week. And I hope everyone stays safe and healthy and has a fantastic rest of your day. See everybody.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of The Entrepreneur Show. If you'd like to connect and network with other like-minded people, entrepreneurs, investors, freelancers, and startups, check out our app or go to our website, joinentre.com. Thank you so much for being a part of our community. If there's anything that we can do to help you, please reach out to us and let us know.